Welcome to the Spoke presentation. My name is Pierre and I'm from THE & Company and Barcode Apps. We're going to show you today the Spoke application which interfaces with Spire. Now this is a purchase order landed cost calculator and estimator, and in order to prevent you from bearing me going through all the data input, I'm going to pull up a sheet that already has some information on it and walk you through some of the details in each and every different section. Spoke is a licensed product. You will require a license. It is for 3 users. You provide us the name of the users and their passwords, and we will code them in there for you. And naturally it is also subject to a maintenance, so your login screen will display to you when your maintenance is due, and it is licensed per company, so it's specific to a database set that will exist in your Spire database. So once you log into Spoke, I'm just going to take some of these things off and just focus directly on the data that's here. You have the option of selecting from the get-go all of the various tax tables related to the provinces that you're doing business in. The data set that we're using today is in reference to province of Quebec, so I've selected the province of Quebec, and I'll explain to you why we need to have this information. The database will automatically, there's a link that interfaces. The data is automatically updated every 10 minutes. The information on how to create this link is included in our manual, or when we install the application for you, we will explain to you all the setup that is required to do that. Let's go back and look at the bottom over here. We have 5 different sections where the data is actually calculated and 1 reporting section. So the purchase information is located in the first, the date, duty, and brokerage, the freight information, any additional charges, and all the calculations are done in the 5th sheet. In the first sheet, we have the option to select up to 6 different purchase orders. So if you pick a purchase order, it will tell you exactly what the status of that purchase order is. Right now, this is showing as being fully received. If we go and get 1 or 2 more of the lower, higher values, you'll notice that this one has not even been issued yet. So we've got some different structures that are available. If you wish to remove these from your list, all you have to do is just go back and set this to PO number, and you'll deal with it accordingly. You can only enter or use fields that are gray, that have a gray background. So in this particular case, I've got it picked up the vendor code, it picked up the amount of that issued purchase order, the currency that it was issued in, the actual currency rate that was used when the purchase order was issued, and what the current live currency rate is currently right now in Spire. Now, if I remove this value here, you'll notice that you're starting to get some notifications. So basically, as you go, all the fields that are said required, you must be filling those fields in accordingly. And because I selected the currency here was US dollars, our data on our invoices and all our relevant information is showing us that it wasn't 1.306 that was used, but actually 1.32 that was used at that time. Now, in order to validate this information, I can just quickly slide over here some information that I'm going to be using across the various documents. Over here we have values telling us each and every commercial invoice, what was included on it, what the values were, and I'll be doing some screen prints of this and bringing those into the display to validate why I'm putting these values in. So this is currently telling me that if I change this to 1.31, you'll notice that it's telling me the shipment has increased by so much. actually, it was 1.32 that was used for this specific purchase order. You can have multiple purchase orders, all the way up to 6. They could be in different currencies. The currencies will show up as you pick them. You can change the rate. Now, whatever you put in the or use this rate will now become the calculator for these specific values. Okay? It's also indicating to me that there's currently 25 item numbers on this specific purchase order. If we move to the duty and brokerage, we find that we have the ability, first of all, of setting this to either include the taxes in the calculations or to exclude. So in this particular case, the data that we're using is based on the company excluding taxes in their landed costs. Okay, so as you change this, you will see that the values over here will change. And what do we have in here? Well, we have actually the brokerage information, brokerage invoice number, the amount of the invoice value, and what currency was used. Now, these are selectable fields. When you have a drop down on a currency required, you'll be able to, and right now we are only, this particular customer is only using 3 currencies. If you're using 6 or 7, they will all show up in this particular lookup screen. And if for some reason you have a currency or currency rate, or you had to, this was a Canadian invoice and you had to change it, and you did have to pay an exchange value because you're paying it in US dollars in Canadian values, you can actually put in the rate and it will change the values. Based on the information that was provided, we have the ability here of entering all this information. Now, the key components on this particular sheet is as follows. This is the area that seems to be of great concern to many people. The best way to do this is to explain exactly what goes on in this particular case here. This document is the document that comes from the Canada Customs. This is where you're going to find out where you have what's called these line numbers. If you notice over here, there's only information related to one item, which all of the items on this entry are relevant to this specific harmonized code. If you had different harmonized codes, you would have a line 2 and a different harmonized code, a line 3, a line 4, a line 5, a line 6, etc. Spoke is designed to handle up to 5 different items. Most entries really relate to 2, sometimes 3. So based on this document, and the fields that are related to it, let me just bring that back again. What we have here is we have the government rate having to do with the exchange rate that the government wants to use that day. The items, all these items relate to this harmonized code. It has the weight, it has a duty, it has a value, and then all the calculations are from there. And the total value of this entry, $1,008.26. So what we do is we extract that information. We provide you with the box numbers in reference to that actual document so that it's easier for you to find the information. On many entries, the government doesn't stipulate the quantity. We require it, and therefore we will actually give you some notifications as to what's missing and where that information should come from. The rate of customs duty, in this particular case, there is no rate for this particular harmonized item. So it's very possible that you might not have a duty rate, but you will have a GST rate. So if the duty rate is there, you input the duty rate in this field. If it's not, you leave it blank. 0 is also a value. So if you have a field that is required and says it's missing some information, as it will appear on the next one, I'll explain to you how you can get around that. It's just simply, even though you will never see a 0 value, you can actually enter the 0. So the currency for conversion is 15,440. If we look at the actual entry that we did in step number 1, 15,440.40 was the actual value. Government is confirming that. The exchange rate that showed up on the Canada Customs form is 1.30. Okay, and from this point on, we calculate everything else. There is no excise tax being calculated on this entry. We are showing here an error. Okay, you're receiving 920 units. You're missing 920 units in box 29. We'll come back to that in a moment. Down here are all the items that actually relate to the brokerage invoice. And if I look at the brokerage invoice, which is now on the screen, you will find that here is where you have and each broker does it differently. So the value that you have to enter for everything is 1171.15. The 1008.26 is really what the duties are, and then they have their individual charges that they charge. So based on that, we've added that information. Here's the 1171, which is the actual total value of the invoice. Here are the breakdowns of the various charges, including the related either HST, GST. In this case, it's Quebec sales tax, and the HST, and they're what they call a TPS value. By selecting the tax code here is basically what is actually changing. If I change this to Ontario and I go over here, you'll notice it says Ontario HST for 13%, and there is no secondary tax. So it's important that you actually pick the values accordingly. And we summarize, and if there are no error messages popping up, then you wind up with a total brokerage with no taxes being actually only $141.67. Okay. People will say, well, what happened to $1,008.26 of HST? Because it's on an exclude basis, and this particular client pulls a tax rebate in Quebec differently, then he's going to deal with this amount on a separate filing with the Quebec government. If you were to include the taxes, then it would calculate and add the taxes accordingly. In this particular case, it is being excluded. So back to freight. So in freight, you have the ability of putting in your vessels, your container numbers, your seals, the various dates that apply to the container. But the most important information here is you need a value, okay, of a weight, because this is used for various different scenarios. And based on the various weights, you might have a different size container. In this particular case, this entry relates to a 40-foot high cube container. If you're doing CBMs, all these costs will be calculated. The invoices provided, you have 6 different freight invoices that you can actually put in here. So if I put in a different invoice number here, let's say as an example, and I said the invoice value was $258.97, and the currency for this invoice was EXUs, it looks at what the Spire values, which is the euros, it looks at what the Spire value settings is set for currency into the system, and you could actually then put in the actual currency value that you actually used, and it will adjust it. This is the calculation values that are used. So if you don't specify or use this rate, it will use the Spire existing currency rate. And you can go on and you can have a complete mixture of values related to this. And if it's a Canadian dollar value, simply just put in Canadian dollars and it will put in the rate of 1, and you'll continue from there. If you wish to change, modify, delete, you can do so at any time. Any gray background field is available for change. So it gives you the sum total of the values, not in specific currency, but the total number, and then that all these, because this is actually 3 different currencies, actually breaks down in a total currency value of Canadian dollars. Additional charges. Notice that we're saying Quebec. Notice that we're saying we've got pre-pulling rates here, storage fees, labels. Again, you can have up to 20 additional values that you can pull. You can have LC charges, brokerage charges, supplementary charges. You can go wild and input any value that relates. Again, what applies here is when you actually put in a value, and let's just put in testing, and let's put in the reference for the testing. Let's say the invoice is, and in this particular case, let's make it US dollars, and let's say that for whatever reason this was from a different new currency rate that just came out today, much higher. Okay, now notice here we're getting an error code because of the Quebec taxes in this particular case is missing for the Canadian dollar value. So, and in order to alleviate this, what I will do is I will put in a 0 value. So if I delete this, it's going to show me that it's missing a tax. So if I put a 0 value, it will actually make the error code disappear. In sum total here, there's $619.45 value dollars, which really relates to $701 Canadian. We also give you a summary at this point that gives you the total freight, additional costs, specifically with no taxes. So far it's $7,225. The key is all happening in here. This is where you will get a complete summary of your purchases, how they land. This is your original foreign currency purchase. So if you have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, it'll all add up in here. Okay. Your brokerage fees, your freight, any additional costs. You have the details. We're getting error messages saying that missing 920 units in box 29. What it's saying right now is the sum total of the units being received here is 920 units. We have not allocated the proper amount to do the calculation, as was indicated by this error as well. So all we need to do here is put in 920 units. The error has disappeared. The screen is clean. This has somewhat finished. And we're still getting an error message because what we do is we look for the HS code that is married to the part number. So in this particular case, it's saying that the duty line number that was automatically allocated to the HS code is in this line and in this line missing. So you can override this because you don't have to go into or refresh the data. If you have 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 different line items, you'll be able to pick which line item it relates to. So it is very important within Spire to have HS codes married to the exact part numbers. Up at the top of this sheet and over a little bit to the right, we have the classification number that came from the duty rate. The quantity of 920 has been allocated. We have 5 different methods of allocating this information. If I select one of these, I can do freight cost by cubic measurement. I can do freight costs by specific meter value, by specific quantity. I can do it based on weight for each individual item, or as a cost value percentage. This particular client likes to use cost value percentage. So once I select that, or if I selected another, let's say, value, all those that did have freight values, you notice I'm missing data here because I don't have the actual weight value in the actual part number. It is imperative that if you're going to use specific values, that those fields be included and updated properly within Spire. So let's go back over here, and the error message has disappeared. It tells me my taxes are calculated based on this. It gives me a validation percentage for every individual item. So what we are doing here is we're looking at the cost of each one of these items, and instead of adding a fixed value, we're adding, because the costs are exactly the same, we're actually splitting it. So you'll see the values will change depending on the actual value of the information. So we wind up with the landed duty paid Canadian dollar cost per piece, which is so much, and this is the estimator in one way, and you have the actual value of the Canadian duty that you're going to input into Spire listed here, and the actual value that is listed in Spire for the freight is $229. This relates to this item only. Now, I will just switch over here and bring in the actual order in Spire, and we're working on this particular order right now. So if I open up this order and bring it back to this screen, you will see that we have a duty, a freight, a duty percentage, and a freight percentage. We use the actual sum total value of each and every one of these specific items. So if you're going to manually input this information, you go and you look at the actual sheet, okay, and you would put the actual item in here. You would go in and put the actual duty rate value here and the actual freight cost here, and you go down one by one by one. Well, that, if you have a lot of items on a purchase order, and you can handle up to 300 lines in this version of Spoke, you're going to run into some problems. Okay, a lot of back and forth. So that's why we have what's called update this receiving to Spire purchase order. So if you click on this particular application, it will ask you, do you want to update all of these values? Now that you know that you do not have any error messages, you proceed. So PO received, information updated. The second step is you need to receive the purchase order in Spire. So if we go to Spire, and so all these values have actually been inputted now. It shows Canadian dollars 431, 229.89, everything else. Okay, so I will now save, and I will receive this purchase order. Okay, now you can actually go ahead and, depending on your settings, put in a vendor's invoice value, and I'm just going to give it some sort of quick term here. And I am not going to close this purchase order. Going back to my calculation number 5, my step 3 is I've done my update, so it updated all this information. I've received the purchase order in Spire, and after you receive it, this is to reset the currencies. This process will update the currency exchange rates. Basically, what we did is we looked at what the Spire rates were. We noticed that you made some changes because you had different rates here and there. We went ahead and changed all of these, and we changed up to 20 of them, depending on how many you have in your system. And now we're going to actually reset them to what they were after we've done our import. So currently, right now, this particular process is quite finished. I can have a summary report print, which I can print to a piece of paper. I can summarize, attach all my documents, make some notes, and if I had items that were actually serialized or lot numbered, I will have all that information that would be sitting in here. At the end, what is recommended is that you save the document based on the actual purchase order number or purchase order number range that you did. So you can actually process up to 300 different items in one specific shot. And if you go in and you now look at your items in your receipt, you'll notice the purchase order is now received. You'll be able to see exactly what your true landed cost is on an item. So if I open this and I go and I look at this SL6113A, within the inventory module, you will notice that purchase orders 137 here has come in. It's come in at a calculated 28 units received at a cost of $31,449. You notice these values are changing, and these values will change dependent on the currency exchange rates, on the amount of additional data or additional charges that you may have. You can reach us at any time at the number 4, Spire at gmail.com, or at thecobv at gmail.com, or at pierre at barcodeapps.com. Thank you and have a great day.